How you doing? I'm the first time I ever do, out of all the years that I've had a YouTube channel, the first time that I ever actually take the time to sit down and explain myself on what I'm doing in the videos. Because all I do is upload videos and just let people look at them and they can figure them out. But lately I've had a lot of people ask me, to explain the techniques that I use to train my dogs, and especially after I started putting music on my videos, because before, when I started, I didn't know how to edit the videos and put the music on there. And then after I learned, I started putting music, and then you can't really hear what I'm telling the decoys and what I'm telling the handlers, so you can't really, you don't have a reference point to what I'm doing unless if you're an experienced trainer. So I figured, I should take the time to upload videos explaining some of the training techniques. So what I want to talk about on this video is decoying. Since that's my forte, being a retired decoy, I can take the time right now to talk about the two types of decoying: the sport decoying and the reality decoying. So basically, to hit on the sport decoying, you have two types of decoying in sport. You have a training decoy and you have a trial decoy. For example, like in French ring and in Mondio ring, you have decoys that are being certified by the organizations like NARA and United States Mondio Ring Association, and even in Schützen, they're certifying decoys to do trials. But those decoys are very necessary, because you can't have trials and you can't grow the sport without certified decoys. The situation is with the sport, though, is that I see, in my experience, is that NARA and the United States Mondio Ring Association and DVG, Schützen USA, whatever, they should really concentrate and make a full commitment on developing training decoys, because the training decoy is the life of the sport. It is so important that you can't make dogs in sport to a high level in any other sports without decoys that can really put technique on your dog. And those guys have to be experienced. Those guys have to be well developed and well trained and knowledgeable, and that takes years and years and years. I would say that it's so important that, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a new handler and I have a nice dog I just imported and I wanted to do French ring. And I go on the internet, I go to the NARA website, and I see a club 20 miles from my house. And then I see another club that's 200 miles from my house. And then I have a decision, which club do I join? But my advice is, before you make that decision, if you are competitive and you want to compete to win, my advice is, because there's a lot of people that they don't care about winning, they want to just have fun with their dogs, and they're all about the barbecues and the get-togethers and having fun, and because sport is fun. Mondio ring, French ring, Schützen, it's a lot of fun. The decoying, the training, the competing, the getting together, the going to the club, all that stuff, the traveling to the seminars, the traveling to the trials, you make your new friends, all kinds of stuff you do. And it's pretty consuming. But if you're competitive, my advice would be to find yourself the best training decoy you can find before you join a club. And join the club with the best training decoy, because it's very hard to find those guys. I mean, if the club that's 50 miles from your house has a good trainer, a good training director, a good nucleus, and good trial decoys, but they don't have a guy there that makes dogs, that's a training decoy, that's the guy that's going to put the high level on your dog, that's going to teach your dog to score high and to pass your trials, I would go to, and the one that's 200 miles away does have one, I would go to the one 200 miles away. I would drive. I would spend the time and money to actually have my dog made by the guy that has the experience and the guy that has the skill level. Those guys need to be looked for and sought after, and those are the guys in sport that I would put my dogs in their hands, because you're gonna in the long run be better off, even if you have to drive further. In dog sports, you have to drive to be able to meet people that are actually, you know, real good at what you want to do. You're like captive to your environment. You know, it's like you're relegated to work with the guys that are around you. But if you start getting into this, you know, and you start spending money and time, you really need to be with a very good training decoy, not just a trial decoy. I would dare to say that in sport, decoying is more important. Training decoy, not trialing decoy, not, you know, a guy that's, you could have 10 decoys in a club, and if none of them are training decoys, I would go to the one that has one or two decoys, and that guy has made a lot of dogs before. I would dare to say that in sport, the training decoy is more important than the training director. Now, when we talk about reality, another thing I wanted to talk about, in my experience, as far as when I used to compete in French ring and train in Mondio and do a little Schutzen, whoa. Okay, so in sport, the training decoy is much more important, in my opinion and in my experience, than the actual training director. Because the training director could teach you a lot and put good technique and good handling, good obedience, good everything, but in the ring sports, biting is the most dominant of all the phases in the sport. More dominant, there's more biting than obedience, than agility. So that in my opinion is the imperative situation you have to look for is training decoys over a club with a really good trainer. It would be best if you have a club that has a really good trainer and that guy's a really good training decoy too. But those are hard to find. But now in reality versus reality decoying, in reality it's a little bit different. In sport, you have, when you compete in sport, you have one or two dogs that you can invest a little bit of time every day into, and a lot of time, like 3 to 4 times a week, into that dog at the club. And then, you know, you do a little bit on the side in your house. But then again, it's 1 or 2 dogs. But in reality, you have to have a different system, because now you're dealing, most of the guys that do reality are guys that are brokers and guys that are professional trainers and have kennels and training services and inboard training and stuff like that. And those guys have to have a different system, because those guys have 10, 20 dogs to train. They don't have 1 or 2 dogs to train. So through the years, in my experience, I've come up with having 1, 2, or 3 trainers that each trainer has 5 dogs. Because if you have 5 dogs instead of 20, you can get to all 5 every day. But if you have 15, 20 dogs, one guy can't get to all those dogs in one day. You're going to train those dogs. You're going to see that dog every second or third day. at the most if you're working hard. And there has to be a different way of training, and that's how I came to how I train. And what I do is, in sport, when you make a dog, you can work that dog differently. But in reality, when you're doing a lot of dogs, I sort of like came up with my own system where I let the dog mature into what he needs at that level of maturity. And I start working the dog basically on the two most important things, which is the hunt drive, the hunting for the retrieve, and bite development. Now I've noticed through the years when I do that once the dog has a real strong bite, he's real confident in all the other phases of training. For example, he's real confident in obedience, he's real confident in agility, he's real confident in sociability, he's real confident dealing with other dogs, he's real confident dealing with stressors, with psychological issues, with better nerves and stuff like that. Now the thing is that, and when you have a lot of dogs to work versus one or two, it allows you the luxury of being able to work those dogs, for example, every 3 to 4 days at most. And when you get to those dogs, you make sure that they have a lot of fun retrieving and hunting, teaching them to use the nose right away and not the eyes for their hunting, for the retrieve article. And in the bite development, you make sure that they enjoy biting and they get strong biting, and really let them mature into it. Now, there's certain things you do at certain ages, okay? Like in sport, you can, since you have a really high level decoy that's a really good maker of dogs, a really good training decoys, that decoy can teach the dog artificial stress, like for example, baton work, whip work, bottles with the rocks, all kinds of artifice training in sport. But in reality training, you can do that if you have a high level of knowledge. You never let an inexperienced decoy handle a young dog, okay? You always have your experienced decoys work the dogs in the bite work. The bite work is something only for experienced guys. Now, you do show artificial stressors, but I've come up with certain things that you do and you don't do, as far as that's concerned. As the dog gets older, the dog goes through the first 2 months, which is, you start working the dog at 7 to 8 weeks, and then the dog goes from 7 to 8 weeks doing bite development, puppy bite development, and retrieval work until the dog starts teething at 4.5 months. Once the dog starts teething at 4.5 months, then I start changing everything. Because from 4.5 months to 7 months, the dog starts teething, and there's a phase in their lives that they go through that you can make or break the dog right there. It's a very delicate part of their lives. They go through a lot of, stress up here. And the main thing that I use in my experience in developing dogs and making dogs is, I make sure that I realize that the dog that I'm working looks big and strong, but he's a puppy. Mentally, psychologically, he's a puppy. So I don't do anything that's gonna give him a negative experience. I always try to train on the side of precaution, on the side of safety, so that my percentages later on of success are higher. Now, there's a lot of training done that they push the puppy, and your percentages later after teething, when you start training protection, the dog doesn't want to go to the decoy, doesn't want to bite, and you have a lot of dogs damaged. So once I enter this phase of teething, the most important thing is, for example, if I'm working a tug, a sack and a tug, I like to get from the sack to the tug before the teething stages. Through teething, I look to see what kind of a puppy I'm working with. Some puppies can keep biting the tug with no problem, and it doesn't ever affect them negatively. But if you see that the dog is having problems with the mouth hurting, and he can't deal with the stress and the pain as good as the other one, then I go back to the sack and I wait. I keep working the bite, of course, to maintain that hardness of mouth, but I wait. There's no issues to be pushed. There's no issues to be examined, or there's nothing you want to push the dog to do in that time. You're best off waiting when you're training for reality. Now, in reality, from the 7 weeks to the 4.5 months before teething, I like to do the biting with dogs. I try to work with dogs that have a lot of fight in them to go bite. Dogs that like to bring the energy to the decoy. Dogs that like to bring the fight to the decoy. Not dogs that need help. The dogs that need help, I stay away from. Okay? I like to find the dogs that have a lot of heart towards the fight towards the decoy. That they don't need help from the decoy to stay on a hard bite. And those dogs are very difficult to find out. If you're working with bloodlines that produce that, it gets easier. But you're gonna find that the dogs that need a lot of prey biting can be made to be good dogs later, but the really, really good ones for reality training, for personal protection, for police training, are the ones that have a lot of fight in them, that they bring the fight to the decoy. And you could work them in stationary biting, which is backup biting. Now, when you start developing a dog in backup biting, like that, in stationary biting, from a puppy, the dog starts thinking differently. You start initiating him in his career as a biting dog in a different mentality, because the dog starts getting serious about what he's doing. He's not thinking about the decoy being his partner like in sport. In sport, a lot of the bite work is done in prey. There's a lot of running around, and the dog all has to do is bite and hold on. And the dog is strong because prey biting makes you strong. And sport dogs are strong. There's a lot of... Sport dogs are more advanced than police dogs. They have more hours of training. They have more control. They have a higher level of training. Okay? But the end result of sport training is not as good as the sports that are done with stationary biting for the streets, for reality, for personal protection, and for police work, in my opinion and in my experience. So because of that simple reason, I decided to go with stationary biting from the beginning, and I stay away from the puppies that can't do it. And I mean, it eliminates a lot of weakness and a lot of weak dogs into the program, and then that later you breed. But once the dog enters that teething stages, you definitely wait and you have patience. A lot of guys, they push the envelope and they ruin dogs. That's where the dogs, 80% of dogs get ruined, is in the teething stages. And people, because of inexperience, think that the dog is no good, that the dog doesn't want to bite. No, it's not that the dog is no good and the dog doesn't want to bite. It's that the dog is going, he's a puppy, he's very immature, he's not an experienced dog, he's not an adult dog, and he's going through pain, the most painful part of his life. So you, as a good handler, trainer, decoy, for reality dogs, you have to understand that. Same thing with sport dogs. That's a very important part of being patient in dog training. So once the dog starts coming out of teething and you get to about the 7 month, the main thing there is to maintain the dog's hardness of mouth, and you dedicate more time to retrieving and hunt drive for the retrieve article, so that he could use that later on in detection. Maybe you have a dual purpose dog. So, or you might have a single purpose detection dog, or you might have just an apprehension dog. But if you'll know more or less where to guide him during that time. Now, once you get to the 7 month stage of the dog's life, then another phase comes in that's very important if you're training for reality. In sport, the dog immediately they start teaching him the program, the different programs, the different bites, the different exercises, the defense of the handler, the revolver attack, the face attack, the fleeing attack, the blind search. You know, some guys that are high-level trainers, they teach the whole Ring 3 program from the beginning. They don't teach the Ring 1 and then they go to Ring 2 when he passes in Ring 2. No, they teach the whole Ring 3 program, everything, object, everything. Search and escort, everything. They teach it as a fun educational game. So those are the high-level decoys in sport. So in reality, you have to wait. You can't go into all that, okay? You have to wait, and you have to make sure that, first of all, because you're working a prey dog in sport. In reality, you're working a different type of dog that's developing differently. You're developing a dog that's not being worked in running around bite work, in prey biting. You're working a dog that's being developed in stationary biting that brings the fight to the decoy, and then the dog sees the decoy as a different person. The dog starts to think around that time, hey, this is for real. This is not a game. In sport, the dog knows that it's going to be 15 minutes of biting and then it's over. They're super intelligent animals. In reality, the dog starts thinking, wait a minute, I'm going to hurt him before he hurts me. So you're developing a different mentality in stationary biting, which is more important for police training and for personal protection training. So the most important thing after the dog finishes teething is you check to see how the quality of his bite. Some dogs, as soon as they come out of teething, need a month or two to get his power back, to be at a level that he was before he started teething in the biting, to have the quality of that bite that he had before he started teething. Because a lot of dogs, once they come out of teething, do not attain that level of quality bite that he had before he started teething. But you as a decoy, as a training decoy for reality, have to remember that. And you got to know each dog where he left off. And you have to know, hey, I have to wait on him and I have to keep working him until he gets back to that strength again. It might take him a month, it might take him 2 months. High quality dogs don't take him any time. Sometimes they take a week or two and they're back strong again. But the most important thing as a training decoy at that time, after teething, is to wait for that dog to get the power back in his mouth. Once that power and that hardness and bite is reached again, okay, it'll come. With good quality dogs, it'll come. Once he's biting hard again and you see that he's thrashing and his bite pressure is really high again, then you start working on his aggression. Now, in power biting, I teach guys not to use defense. I teach in power biting. Okay, so we left off where I teach people in power biting not to use defense. To basically, the first sentence in the power biting manual is, the art of training a dog is not ever letting him know fear. And a lot of people always ask me, hey, what do you mean by that? How can you teach true aggression without ever letting the dog know fear? So, I usually don't answer that, but I'm gonna answer it for you now because I've been asked that a lot. and and I feel generous today. But anyway, in the years that I've been training dogs, I've been training dogs 40 years. I've noticed after like 30, 35 years, I started realizing, you know, a lot of dogs, you go through all this time training them, and a lot of dogs, when they're doing offensive bite work on a search or something, and they're one-on-one with a suspect, by the time the handler gets to him, you know, he's got two decisions to make. He's got the decision, I stay on this guy and I take him out, or I can turn around and run. Those are the two decisions a dog has to make if he's been worked in defense, because he's been introduced to fear. Now, defensive training is fear-based. You're appealing to the dog's fear to get him to be aggressive with you. And I've always taught people, I only teach defense in two different occasions. When the dog has no drive and I have to train him, I'm forced to train him, which I don't do that type of training anymore. I haven't done it for like 30 years, 35 years. And the other time is once the dog is made and you put him on the table, you can get more aggression out of him. But the dog's already made. The dog is already trained. There's no breaking him. You know, every dog has a breaking point in cardio. But if you teach a dog never knowing fear, that option, when he's downfield one-on-one with a suspect, is never up here. He doesn't know that option. And after 35 years of training dogs, I realized, hey, every time I train a dog the way I've been doing it without not knowing fear, the percentages of that dog breaking, or in a table test, backing up, go way through the roof, like to 95, 97, 98%. And you get a lot stronger dog. So people, going back to what the question was, how do you teach a dog not to be, not to know fear? How do you get the real aggression out of them? Well, this is the key. This is the secret. And how I do it, how I've been doing it for a long time, and I've had a lot of success with it. How I don't teach a dog fear is, I don't teach them defensive bite work, okay? And a lot of people teach defensive bite work and they train their dogs, and they're getting trained all over the world. But what works best for me is, I teach the dog, how I get the aggression out of them, is I teach the dog when I'm training them, when I'm making them, after that teething stage, when the dog is already reaching 9-10 months and I've already had his bite strong again after he came out of teething, is by guarding what he bites. If you teach the dog to guard what he bites, his prey article, he's not developing aggression out of fear. In his mind, he chased a rabbit, he killed it, and then he's guarding it. So you're getting true aggression. You're getting that dog to guard his kill. There is no fear in that. And that dog is guarding that thing harder than if you push him into fear to show aggression. So that's my big secret. That's what works for me. That's why I say you don't have to teach, the art of making a dog is by not ever letting him know fear. That's what I mean by that. So I get my aggression out of my dog by making him guard the tug, the sleeve, the sack. And as the dog gets more confident and more mature, his intensity is going to get stronger. Now, the dog is going to be, you know, his fight instincts is going to be here, and his aggression instinct here, because you don't really have prey and defense when you're doing this type of bite work. You have his fighting instinct and you have his aggression. So his fighting instinct is going to be here, but his aggression is going to be here, right? So how do you get his aggression a little higher to be at least 75% of his fighting instinct? How do you balance that out? Well, as he matures, what I do is I make him guard. I put more pressure on him to guard that article. And if he shows me a great deal of intensity in his guarding his sleeve, okay, guarding his jacket, guarding his sack, his tug, whatever I'm using. As he gets stronger, then his aggression comes out, his confidence comes out, his barking is deeper and louder. He's at the end of the line throwing bites. You can bring the power out of him, the true aggression out of him, without ever teaching him fear. I mean, you're not appealing to his fear to get him to get strong, to get him to get aggressive. And then you start moving away from the sleeve, directing the aggression into the suspect with no equipment, dressed as a civilian. That's what I use. That's how I've gotten my dogs to get strong and confident. And as the dog gets older and more advanced in the training, later 12 months, 14 months, I start increasing the intensity on that, the pressure on the dog. So basically, training for reality, a good training decoy is so important. It's like you have to have we said that in sport, the training decoy is more important than the trainer. In reality, the trainer is more important than the training decoy because of this reason. In reality, you have to make decoys. You got to make sure that your decoys in the bite work are working within your system so that the dogs never know fear, never get messed up, never get crossed up in your fight and your bite work philosophy, your bite development philosophy. That's been my experience. That's how I do it. There's other people training differently, but when you have a lot of dogs to do, a lot of puppies to make, this is the way of training that works best for me and has worked best for me for a long time. So basically, that's how I do the decoy work at the beginning, making the dogs. Now we're talking about pre-sales training. We're not talking about post-sales training. You know, there's two types of training. There's the pre-sales before the dog is sold to a personal protection family or a person that wants to have a personal protection dog or a department that wants to buy a police dog. That's post-sales. The training is different then. Then it's more scenario-based training. But making the dog, without that, you're not going to have a police dog. That's the farm. That's more important. That's what needs to be developed. Trainers need to start developing more training decoys, just like in sport. Instead of right now, everybody, all the organizations in sport are developing certified decoys. The future in sport is not in certified decoys. The future is in developing training decoys, both of them. The certified decoys, you can have the trials because you can't have trials without them. But developing the certified decoys, in my opinion, is not as important as developing training decoys. The same thing in reality. In reality, and let me tell you, in sport, until that gets addressed, French ring is going to stay small. Mondial ring is growing, but it could be bigger. I mean, Schutzen could be bigger. Schutzen's declining because of all, you know, it takes longer to train a Schutzen dog than it does a ring dog. So, good training decoys have to take the time to make other decoys and to teach them, to develop them, to bring them along, and to really show them how to make dogs. Because if you don't have that, the future of working dogs is going to keep declining, and the future of ring sport is going to be small always. It's never going to grow. It's never going to grow. Because if you don't have clubs with training decoys, you're not going to grow. You're not going to get dogs that are going to get titled. And police work, if you don't have clubs all over the country that are making good reality dogs, you're not going to have good protection dogs, you're not going to have good detection dogs, and you're not definitely going to have not good apprehension dogs. So the training decoy and both are super important, but in reality, making new decoys, training new decoys is also super important. Just like making the dogs, you have to make the decoys as you go along. So a lot of the good trainers that are the good brokers, the good people that have the training services, they have to take the time to learn how to decoy, to making dogs the correct way, and developing other people to do it. So basically, that's what I wanted to hit on today. I took the time to explain how I do it. There's other ways to make dogs or train dogs. There's a lot of different ways. But as far as from the broker point of view perspective, that's how I do it. That's how I've always done it. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, just make comments. Hit me up on my email on my website, vonmartileskennel.com. If you like the video, you can subscribe. Like they say on YouTube, subscribe and share. And till the next video, thank you.